So Viltrox did something huge that I thought was going to change the game for me, but let's be honest, it didn't. This is the 28mm f4.5 pancake lens from Viltrox. When I saw this, my eyes lit up. I'm an A7CR shooter, I love compact cameras, and a full frame 28mm f4.5 lens, that was a dream to me. But it's kind of turned into a bit of a nightmare. And let me explain why a bit later on, but we're gonna go over some quirks that I haven't seen any other YouTuber really talk about, and I think these quirks are pretty important for you to know if you're gonna be buying this lens. So going into the pure specs of this, I purchased it for $85 off Indiegogo. It is a 28mm f4.5. It is stuck at 4.5. So if you want anything wider, that's not gonna happen. If you want anything tighter, that's not gonna happen. So if you're only shooting at 4.5, then this is the lens. It is barely fast enough to shoot sports like basketball, hockey, etc. Especially indoor shooting, it's going to be a bit difficult. So let's actually talk about the indoor shooting capabilities of this. There are some quirks that I really need to mention if you're going to be buying this. While I know this lens is not suited for professional photo or video work, that's not going to stop me from trying. I brought it to a UND basketball game against Alabama, and for this I was mainly shooting on my FX3 for videos, so I wanted a secondary camera to just take some thumbnail photos and just capture the moment, because you don't see the University of North Dakota playing Alabama every day. You don't. So I wanted to use my A7CR and the 28mm pancake lens as just kind of a pocket camera just to have as a secondary. And that's when some of the quirks that I've noticed with this lens really started to take hold. With indoor lighting, the way the lens is and how tiny it is, the light hits it in such a weird way that it produces these rays. I'll put a couple images on right now to kind of showcase them. And while for photo, they can definitely add some interest to your image, especially if you line it up with the subject. It's just kind of cool to use. But they can also destroy photos completely because of them being just in the way too much and blocking your subject, lowering the contrast of the image. It's kind of a fickle thing to deal with. This makes it basically impossible to shoot video on this unless you're on a tripod. If your camera is not stationary, moving the lens around is just going to cause them to like fluctuate. I'll put an example on screen now. It's very hard to deal with if you're just run and gun shooting, which as a sports videographer and photographer, I do that 24/7. That's just what I do. Most of this is attributed to how small the lens apparatus is. This can be fixed by a lens hood, but I've not seen anybody come out with one yet. If you have the capabilities of making a lens hood for this, please do. I will buy that in a second. But until we get a lens hood for this, and I doubt that'll ever happen, these light bands are just going to be a fact of life. Now let's talk about the other side of my photography, and that's landscape. I took it to a trip to Itasca State Park, and some of the images I got from here are some of my favorite I've ever taken. I just love how they look. And to think that this was taken on an $80 lens is crazy to me. 4.5 is kind of that middle ground where it's not wide enough for portraits and it's not closed off enough for like large landscape photos. So I wouldn't use this for very wide shots. It would just be kind of the details and images like this. When I'm shooting more wide angle landscape shots, I move my aperture to about f22 and then just bump my shutter speed up, but it being a fixed aperture on this, it's a struggle. And again, an issue I've ran into with this lens is the light hitting it and reducing contrast from above. This only happens with like overhead lighting, so if you could find a way around it, that's great. Covering the lens with your hand as sort of a makeshift lens hood also helps, but it is something to keep in mind. And those are pretty much the main quirks I've noticed with this lens. If you're using for everyday photos, this is going to be fantastic. It's a tiny chip lens. I mean, you could watch hundreds of videos on it. I'd recommend it in a second. Especially if you have an A7C or A7CR, having a tiny full frame autofocus lens this size, it's just amazing. I'm going to be honest. You can pocket it. It's just the perfect size. So I hope this video can help you make more of an informed decision on whether or not this lens is for you. If you're shooting indoor, I'd definitely be wary of the lens and maybe go another route. Indoor lighting and this lens do not get along. And apart from that, I think that's pretty much all I got for you today. Thank you for watching. Have a good one.